Welcome everybody to a webinar from the American Nuclear Society's Risk-Informed, Performance-Based Principles and Policy Committee. We call it RP3C. My name is Prasad Kadambi and I'm chair of RP3C. The purpose of RP3C is to modernize ANS standards. Modernization has come to mean that risk-informed and performance-based methods are employed to overcome the difficulties that we all know about with purely deterministic and prescriptive methods. We've been calling these methods RIPV approaches. There's a lot of guidance available on RIPV approaches, but most people have not had reason to become familiar with them because the conventional approaches still dominate most of the things we do, including standards development. So RP3C initiated these community of practice webinars on RIPV to enable practitioners of RIPV approaches to share their knowledge and experience. We had the first of these webinars last month on February 28th. The subject was employing a systems engineering framework for enabling use of RIPV methods. Today, we have Marsha Kinley of Duke Energy, who chairs the working group for ANS 2.21, which is about certain aspects of the ultimate heat sinks. She'll be sharing with us her knowledge and experience in modernizing some aspects of developing a new version of the standard. The standard, I believe, could be useful to a lot of developing advanced reactor designs of different technologies. Marsha, please go ahead.
Thank you, Prasad. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on a nice Friday afternoon. We'll try to move this through quickly so we can get on with our shelter in place or shelter at home or whatever you were doing. I want to let you know that the ANS 2.21 standard is currently under revision and that the earlier draft that was circulated to the RP3C committee was draft 2. We're up to draft 3 at the moment. And we have our writers working diligently on it, and we do appreciate all their efforts. I think several of them might be on the call today. Ed Bouchock, Dick Codell, Andy Dewhurst, Ludwig Haber, and Chuck Bowman are current writers. So the modernization of the standard, basically, Prasad approached me back in November last year and wanted to talk to the group about how we would incorporate risk-informed approach to the standards. Traditionally, you know, the standards are more deterministic and deal with the worst-case scenario as the ultimate solution. So this has caused the writers and the whole group to basically kind of stretch our minds around what could we incorporate and change in our language that would still be applicable to current UHS analyses, but move us forward towards a risk-informed approach as well. So today I'll briefly give you an overview of the 2.21 standard, talk about the differing knowledge bases, what that might mean to different people, and how risk-informed methods differ from the traditional methods. And all that culminates into the challenges for the working group. So the official title of the standard is Criteria for Assessing Atmospheric Effects on the Ultimate Heat Sink. So what we're focused on is the inputs, meteorological and hydrological, to the UHS analyses itself. So it's typically thought that power plants wouldn't be using this standard unless they were going to change their licensing basis. So it would apply more to the nuclear sites that are being built in the future, the new generation sites, or redesigns of cooling systems of folks in the future that might have issues with climate change or other water use issues. So when Prasad came to us, we were thinking diligently about what types of UHS systems there are in place across the country currently, and we finally came up with the best way to describe them are similar words the NRC has used: closed cycle systems and open cycle systems. So the meat of the document really starts in section 5, all of the preliminary information up front, definitions and intros is where that sits in the document. In section 5, we deal with the water balance and heat transfer processes and how the meteorological parameters impact that for each type of system. I wanted to identify up front which meteorological parameters were of interest for each type of design. So then section 6, we get more into the metadata itself and how you find the data sources, how you ensure it's good pedigree and QA. They're representative of the site that you're on, because you'll have to combine your data on site probably with off-site sources to get a record length long enough to do probability modeling, and as well as any deterministic modeling needs to be a long record length. Meteorological concerns with climate change are also a new topic for this standard. I don't think other standards have yet addressed this, so this will be a first go at it for us. And then, of course, the quality assurance and required records for the future once you have your calculation in place, what you need to maintain so you can revise it later. So we added section 4, and we started talking about RIPB. And we first needed to define it. And the best description we found so far is from an NRC white paper in 1999. So basically it's saying that we need to use our defense in depth and safety margins and our performance history in order to focus attention on the most important activities of your performance analysis. Evaluate your performance, what criteria are important to that, what's measurable and calculable, and what can you monitor over time to see any change in, and provide flexibility on establishing a way that will encourage improved outcomes in the future for regulatory decision making. And we know that not much has been updated over the years in the reg guides for UHS and other documents still from the 70s and even earlier. So most of the calculations on the books would be deterministic in approach right now. They would involve a maximum return temperature for the UHS over a 30-day water usage to ensure cooling over that period of time. While the risk-based approach, would depend on a range of performances, such as when the event actually occurs, the randomness of the metadata itself, and come up with basically a recurrence interval at the end, or probability of your conditions occurring that would impact your UHS. And during this process of discussing RIPB, we had one of our working group members, an NRC reviewer, express the concern that we needed to make a distinction between RIPB applying to engineering, but not necessarily to the input data or data quality. And I can see his point of view up to a point, but then when we start talking about climate change, we're going to have to analyze conditions in the future, and I think RIPB will actually play a role in that too at some point. So what are our risk issues and uncertainty? We have to identify environmental inputs and assumptions that will create additional risks, such as the frequency of certain conditions or persistence of conditions occurring, and of course the climate change uncertainty. So while both methods or approaches are adequate, ways to address UHS performance and to determine how meteorological data impacts UHS. Probably the risk approach is the better way to do this, so that you can identify what your extreme outcomes might be, even before they happen, based on historical data from the past. So we would recommend probably that if using choice of one or the other method, but it always would be beneficial to look at the other method that you're not using, just in case it came out with worse results, and how you might handle that in your analysis and design. So the UHS modeling itself is outside of the scope of the ANS, but we did add an appendix because we kept coming to the point where we wanted to suggest things to the modeler on how they might approach incorporating the net data and stuff, so and how to analyze the pond temperatures. So we added that and given several examples, deterministic and risk-informed approaches to those analyses. Then I spoke before about the length of the data sets. You'd probably have to combine your on-site data with historical data sets from off-site locations. 30-year data sets is what is typical and recommended for this type of analyses. And thinking of climate change even, we have come to the conclusion that even a longer period of time of our data input would be a good idea. So it's highly recommended you have 50 to 100 years of data in order that you can project out to 100 years at the design phase, because it'll take you several years for your design phase, the construction phase, and then permitting and licensing. You know, all that culminates into you're probably getting into year 20 or 30 before you actually start operating your plant. So this is allowing for like an 80-year operation period of your site. Have to develop your surrogate data sets and pay attention to the representativeness of that data. So let's see, I briefly talked about the 80-year operating life and how we might go about this. There's two approaches. You can actually look at what other folks are modeling and adjust your meteorological inputs if you're approaching it that way, or you could go ahead and have some regional downscaling statistically done to see how the results may change from those gridded models. The nested grid, actually rerunning the model or having someone else rerun the model for you so that you can zoom in on your area of interest spatially, would be a good idea. We think is better representative than actually statistical downscaling might be. The predicted climate data for the UHS performance model inputs, we would suggest that the cumulative probability curve is very useful way of handling that, rather than just taking the results out of a report, say, and say, okay, it says temperature is going to be 5 degrees warmer, let's go bump our numbers up 5 degrees. It would be better to do your statistics a little bit, or I should say probabilities, on that side before you do that modeling. But in Appendix A, we do give some examples. So we have the statistical approach first, which is called the hypothetical example in our appendix, where it normalizes the input data, and it actually removes climate change trending that way, and then reintroduces it at the end as an adjustment to the peak water temperatures. And here we can see the hypothetical example. Basically, it was a linear regression on the water temperature, peak temperatures over time. So you see it trending upward, and that's figure 8-1. And figure 8-2 is the frequency analysis of the detrended pond temperatures. And there you can see if you were to look for a 95th percentile, you would be somewhere up around 94, 95-ish degrees maybe on your pond peak temperature projection that way. Looking at the data a different way, the deterministic example in that appendix presents just the data itself. So here you see an annual trend with peak temperatures, and you're verifying that your model matches, your equation matches your daily observed data as best it can. Now, the risk-informed example in Appendix A is really what we want to get people doing in the future, and there's probably limited experience doing this, but hopefully the engineers are becoming more exposed to it over time as they come out of college these days. So statistically, you do your cumulative probability distribution and get your 95th, 99th percentile, whatever you really wanted to go with, depending on your risk aversion. 99 here, since we have a line, there is about a 92, 93 temperature again, whereas your 95th would be a little bit lower, closer to 90, 91. Yeah. For that particular period of record. That was our example. So in the risk-informed example, we talk about doing a 99th percentile, and that particularly assumes that climate change is either ongoing, has been already observed, or it is projected in your input data that you're feeding into your model already. The adjustments to the simplistic risk-informed model are suggested because you have to do many more runs of your model to get a risk-informed result. You probably end up using simpler models. So what we're thinking is you'd have to adjust your simple model so that it would mimic the complex model better. Rather than just running a simple model on its own, you have to pay attention to what kind of results it's giving you versus the complex model too. So challenges so far for the group, of course, scope and schedule would be for any group. But as we try to get the risk-informed approach and the climate change information in there, it's taking a little bit longer. But we want to be consistent, of course, with the literature. We're looking for resources so that we have a substantial basis for the opinions we're putting out there and recommendations. We want to be sure that they apply to multiple types of ultimate heat sinks and that we are presenting accepted practices. The diverse user skill set and experience of people reading the standard, even my experience in working with engineers is some understand meteorology and some don't, and some understand the models they're using and some don't. And so we have to have a lot of collaboration back and forth, and we've tried even to do that on our committee, on our working group, between the engineers and the meteorologists, so that we can identify those types of questions and address them in this particular standard. So the two things that we are having to go forward with at this point is look a little bit harder at our risk, identifying our risk areas, and review our issues that we've already identified and how they might be addressed with probabilistic risk analyses or other means. And also, it's been brought up that we need a climate change modeler to review that particular section and see if we've presented it appropriately, as well as PRA modelers can give us their feedback. So we'll open it up for questions and suggestions now.
Perfect timing. We just got a question from Bob Littman, and the question is, it seems that the only consideration for UHS issue is the climate change. This assumes status quo for heat exchanger efficiency. How has HX efficiency changed in the last 20 to 30 years compared to historical data for efficiency?
Well, for risk-informed approaches, the net data is also a concern, not just the climate change, but I guess you could say climate change is a surrogate for that. Before there was the realization of climate change, you still had to look at your extreme values and the frequency that they occurred. But over time, I have seen one paper state that, second part of your question, that lake temperatures have been observed increasing around the world, not just in the U.S., but I think Switzerland was one place they were actually looking pretty hard at it, just for environmental type concerns. But
I want, sorry, go ahead, Marsha, I'm sorry.
yeah, well, the efficiency of cooling is more of an engineering type question. I think we've got Chuck Bowman on board now, and he's going to address more of the nozzle selection, spray ponds type things for us, and he's just started writing those particular paragraphs to go into standard. But spray ponds will help to some extent, whether you have a cooling pond or spray pond or not. I think the spray ponds achieve a little bit more cooling.
I wonder if perhaps what the questioner was addressing is, to what extent is climate change the primary driver of this new version of the standard?
It's not at all.
Yeah, right. I think, if it came across that climate change is the big issue that this new version addresses, that's not correct.
No, it's just that climate change is a big risk item for us. The standard was going to be revised anyway because it will sunset if we don't get it revised in a couple more years.
Yeah, and also the thing is that this is really the first standard, as far as I know, within ANS that explicitly considers it. So I think it's worth noting for that reason. But really, the way the standard is being revised, it's just moving it from the old-fashioned way of doing things, deterministic and prescriptive, to taking into account the risk insights, especially of the cooling, capability of the ultimate heat sink, as well as what are the actual important performance aspects of this one system, within, of course, the larger power plant design. So does that answer your question, Bob?
I think it does for the most part, but I guess one of the things that I think is important is that we're looking at a static design of heat exchanger and heat exchange efficiency. And I know from my experience working at a nuclear power plant for over 22 years that the efficiencies in the heat exchangers have improved and the maintenance of the heat exchangers have improved. And so if you project that there's going to be some effect on the ultimate heat sink as a result of temperature rise, I think it would be wise to include in there that if design changes improve efficiencies, that the effect of climate change could be offset by changing heat exchanger design or efficiency by
having that heat exchanger maintained in a better format. I think you're, certainly, I think you're absolutely right. The way I would express it is in the old prescriptive mode, sometimes it wasn't possible to take into account improvements during the operating life cycle, because there were certain parameters that were prescribed so sort of rigidly that, some of them, would be, you would think would be contrary to safety, but yet in the prescriptive mode, the operators of the plants didn't have a choice. So the way this standard is going, hopefully it will provide the flexibility for the operator to take into account any increased margins that become evident And so during the life of the plant, you know, if the margin increases, there should be a way for taking credit for that.
I like the way you explained that. Thank you.
Hello, this is Dick Codell joining.
Hi, Dick.
Hi. I thought it was supposed to start at 3 p.m. or 3:30.
No, it was 3 o'clock.
Okay, you're right.
Eastern.
Yeah. But thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Dick's one of our writers. Yeah.
I thought it was starting at 3:30. Sorry.
I think Ed's on, so we're good.
I do not have any other questions. I don't know if anyone else would want to voice a question or a suggestion.
Well, I just want to add that the standards, I guess, purpose is to help designers come up with their input data sets so that they can properly model the UHS performance for the future. So whether you're in an area where climate change is going to be a big factor or not, you know, that's up to the designer to evaluate that.
So I think if you go to the next slide, you'll see, you know, if this, oh yeah, first of all, you know, we are holding these community of practice sessions once a month on the last Friday of every month. Next month in April, it will be Friday the 24th. In our original announcement, we had a list of topics in mind, but you know, we still are open-minded about topics, and we invite people to, you know, identify topics. And if you would like to speak about it, by all means, please let us know. So we can, you know, in time announce it. So you know, people can join in and will know what to expect. The next slide, I think, Marsha, then, let's see, I just want to mention that, you know, the American Nuclear Society has this ANS Collaborate, and you know, this is the way to join into the community of practice sessions. And, you know, the slides that Marsha presented has a lot of detail, and we'll just be putting it up on the RP3C public website on the ANS standards section of the ANS website. And let's see if there are no other questions. Was there anything else there?
I just received an additional question, and this is from Franklin Hope, and it says, if there is a small modular reactor being built all over the world, could the designer use the ASHRAE, ASHRAE design data instead of calculating design values for UHS?
I think ASHRAE is probably the you know, technical society that has responsibility for a lot of these and environmental you know, constraints on the ultimate heat sink cooling capability. Now,
yeah, cooling systems, chillers and stuff like that, yeah.
Right, yeah. And I don't know, Dick Codell, do you have any insight into what ASHRAE covers?
No, I just know it from HVAC stuff.
I guess if they were using the cooling towers, it would be more appropriate to look at the ASHRAE data, design data.
But I think
the pool lake. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think basically we don't know very much about ASHRAE. I mean, the questioner probably knows much more than we do. But the point I would make is to the extent that there is a consensus standard available from a society like ASHRAE, you know, that consensus standard would be available to support whatever licensing position that the applicant would like to take. And, you know, under the current sort of regulatory framework, every consensus standard will be considered by NRC in order to make sure that you know, if it meets the requirements, the functional requirements of the regulation, then the consensus standard will take priority over something that NRC may want to promulgate. So I think, you know, if there is an ASHRAE standard, and I'm pretty sure that ASHRAE is a member of ANSI, and therefore within the broad group of, you know, American national standards, as it were. So I think it could be used. And I would think that it can be used in coordination with ANS 221, you know, for some aspects of it.
Yeah, and I think you have to consider too that ASHRAE might not give design data for other locations in the world. He's looking at around the world, basically, building SMRs. So you could probably get a rough gut feel for your performance of your UHS for your small modular reactor, but you really need your on-site data or nearby data to make it be representative and ensure that you're designing for the extremes.
Does that answer the question, may I ask?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's see, I don't see any other questions. Do you see, Pat?
I do not see anything else.
I'm sorry I missed it. I'm sorry I missed this presentation, but can I see a copy of it today? I'll go through it.
Most definitely. And is that Bob Littman who asked?
Okay. Again, please.
I just wasn't sure who asked for a copy.
Oh, that was Nick Codell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I will go ahead and send that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, again, I would appreciate feedback on, you know, this presentation and for what we are trying to do with the community of practice, and also suggestions for future topics in any particular area of your interest. If we don't receive any inputs, you know, Kent Welter and Kent Welter couldn't join us today because his kids need attention. And we will come up with a topic, and we will let you know, you know, for April 24th. Again, thank you all for joining us. Hope you found it useful to spend the time on this. And again, let us know one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks,
You did
Pat.
great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks, Marsha.
Yep.